Hi, this is David Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Whether you watch with our friends over at Torah Anytime or wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, as always, it's wonderful to be able to spend this time together. And do not forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. We have a sponsor for this episode, and as I've mentioned beforehand, we are just about out of sponsors. So if you would like to help the Rabbi Orlofsky Show keep going, because I'm definitely not a man of means to be able to support this habit. There is one fellow who has this sort of podcast that he does that he sponsors by himself because he has a lot of money, but I don't. In the words of Blanche Dubois, have always depended on the kindness of strangers. Yeah. So this week, thank you so much. Sponsored by Eliezer Fox. Hi, Rabbi Orlofsky. Thank you for your great podcast. I'm sponsoring in honor of my wife's birthday. Her name is Mina Rachel. Well, happy birthday to you, and many happy returns of the day. And what can I tell you? Your husband is just the best, because there's no better gift you can give somebody than the gift of sponsoring the Rabbi Orlofsky Show, because then you get the schus for the thousands of people who watch the show and listen to the show and get chizuk from it. I get the most amazing emails. I really have to read some of them out. Of people who are sharing the chizuk that they get from this show that we all share together. I am just the voice of all of you. That's all. Very often, the people who listen to the show say, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. And so I'm just expressing how I hope a lot of us think. I have hopefully opened up some ideas that were probably latent inside of you, and we're just waiting for the opportunity to express that. I'm the little child who notices that the king has no clothes, in the Hans Christian Andersen story. So that's it. I'm the voice of the people. and Baruch Hashem, thank you for all the good that you do, and very happy birthday. And we'll take this into account for everybody when you're doing this, listening. Think in mind, it should be a happy birthday. Okay, it's a bit of a sweet podcast because this brings to an end the tenure of producer Yisrael, who has been producing the Rabbi Orlofsky Show since we went on hiatus when producer Michal left us, and we had a dry spell over there. Hopefully somebody else will come by and pick up the slack, and if not, we'll go through another hiatus. And make no mistake about it, I will sit here on this chair in front of the bookcase and talk for an hour every week, but nobody will know. It'll just be me and myself. But anyway, so we wish him tzeitzchim shalom and hatzlacha in all of his endeavors, and hopefully we'll welcome next producer before the next episode. Okay, so Shavuos is coming up. It's going to be Sunday night, Monday, and if you're in Chutz La'aretz, also Tuesday. You know this from, of course, the Atbash of Pesach. The first night will correspond to Tisha B'Av. So since the first Seder came out on Motzi Shabbos, we know Tisha B'Av will be on Motzi Shabbos this year. And the second night corresponds to Shavuos. So the second night came out on Sunday night. So Shavuos is coming out on Sunday night. So it's coming up quickly. And I wanted to share some Shavuos thoughts for you. Those of you who have the minhag to stay up all night and learn and then daven vasikin. So you may not be aware that the Kriyas HaTorah is from Parshas Yisro. You may not be aware of it because you might be sleeping. Yeah. Those people who stand for laning might still be sleeping. Yeah. And not everybody's at their best and their brightest after being up all night. Some people. I remember I was teaching in a yeshiva once, and I would give shir normally at 11:30, from 11:30 to 1. A lot of the guys were sleeping through shir. But on Shavuos night, when I gave it at 1:30 in the morning, everybody was crisp and awake and ready to go. Reminds me when I used to talk about, speaking Lashon Hara. So I would say, there are people who take upon themselves, I won't speak Lashon Hara for 2 hours, right? From 2 to 4 in the morning. And I used to say there's a joke, and teenagers would be, but that's my prime time. But not everybody is. When you reach to be my age group, I usually try to be the one to volunteer to get a little bit of sleep so I could say brachos to be motzi everybody next morning. But there's no question. I tell people, I said, there's times that I have fallen asleep during davening. Never on Shavuos. I never fall asleep. I just blink and we're someplace else. And this can be particularly challenging for me because I'm a Kohen. And when you get the Kohen Aliyah, before you can start the Aliyah, they do this very long Aramaic Kabbalistic poem called Akdamis. And I'm standing there for Akdamis before we get to the Aliyah. So it's definitely a challenge. So the laning is, of course, from Parshas Yisro, the story of Matan Torah. And the minhag, certainly here in Eretz Yisrael, where we have one day, is also to read Megillas Rus in the morning. So right after Shemona Esrei and the Hallel, so we then read Megillas Rus, which through very poor planning was said to the tune of a lullaby. I don't know why this is so. Na 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 na. Go stay up for that. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Where you sleep, I am going to sleep. Yeah. But we tell the story of Rus. I heard from somebody that Rabbi Reisman, who, of course, has been given a very famous Navi Shir in Flatbush for many, many years, that on Shavuos, what he does at some point is he gives a shir in a parak of Rus. There are 4 prakim. He does a different one each year. It's got a 4-year cycle, obviously. And it's very late at night. And you have to get everyone to stay up. So he gives out, I think they're maraschino ices. The way it was described to me, it's maraschino ices, as I remember them from growing up. It's a cup of frozen Italian ices, and it comes with a little wooden spoon, and you have to scrape it off in order to be able to eat it. And so he's giving shir, and people aren't falling asleep because the whole place is going scrape, scrape, scrape. Little ices to stay up, yeah. But we read Megillas Rus, of which there are 4 prakim. And then we take out the Torah, and we call up the Kohen, and we do Akdamis, and then we do the laning, which is, of course, from Parshas Yisro. So I wanted this year beforehand to speak a little bit about the Kriyas Torah and about Megillas Rus, which are put together. And there are a number of reasons. Anytime we read a Megillah, there are a number of reasons where we're reading him, except for Megillas Esther, which is pretty straightforward, and that is there was a takana that was made by Mordechai and Esther to read it on Purim. That's pretty straightforward. Eicha is also pretty obvious, right? Because it's lamentations about the destruction. But when you come to why do we read Koheles on Sukkot or Shir Hashirim on Pesach or Megillas Rus on Shavuos, there's a lot of reasons. One of them is, there are a number of names for Shavuos. One of them is Chag HaKatzir, the harvest time when they would harvest the grain, and they would bring in the wheat harvest. That's the reason that in the Beis HaMikdash we would bring 2 loaves of bread from the new wheat harvest. This would permit the use of the new grain in the Beis HaMikdash. For regular people, it's when we brought the Omer on Pesach, the barley offering, because barley ripens first, to allow the rest of Klal Yisrael to eat Chadash. But in the Beis Hamikdash, you had to wait till you brought the Shei Lechem. So a big theme in Megillas Rus is about the harvest. There's different things. But there's one common denominator between Parshas Yisro and Megillas Rus, and that is, of course, that Parshas Yisro begins with Yisro coming to join the Jewish people. He is a ger. He is inspired by the nisim that took place. Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz has a beautiful insight. It says, Ma Shama, it says, Vayishma Yisrael. So what did he hear? Uba, Ma Yishma Yisrael Uba. What did he hear that made him come? And he says, Kriyas Yamsu from Milchamas Amalek. Why those two things? Yeah, why not the Esamakos? Why not the Mun, everything else? So the Brisker Rav says, because those two nisim everybody knew about. It says that in the battle of Amalek, the sun stood still just like it did for Yehoshua. Yeah, and so there was this miracle that everybody in the world knew about. The sun didn't set, so of course everyone knew about that. And Kriyas Yamsuf, it says all the waters in the world split. You know, so if you were drinking a cup of tea, it's split in half. You know, drink one side. Yeah. So these two everybody knew about. Esamakos was localized. Mun was localized. Brisker Rav says. Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz in Sichas Musa, he has a very powerful thing. He said, you don't understand the question. Ma Yishma Yisro Uba. What did he hear that made him decide to become a Jew? Not Kriyas Yamsuf and Milchamas Amalek, but the combination of those two. Because by Kriyas Yamsuf, when every nation of the world was terrified, you know, as we say in Oz Yashir, this one is frightened, this one is terrified, this one was in a panic, this one was melting. You know, the whole world, nobody would ever touch the Jewish people. Comes Amalek and attacks us, as the Chazal say, like someone who throws himself into a boiling bathtub, knowing he's going to get scalded, but at least he'll cool it off for the next person. Then the impact of Kriyas Yamsuf was suddenly dampened for the nations of the world. Not completely, but it wasn't as impressive. People felt it was open season. You can now attack Jews. We see that, of course, today. I went to America with my daughter and my two grandsons to register them as American citizens. My daughter, of course, even though she was born in Israel, was automatically an American citizen because me and my wife were both born in America. Her children, even though both of her parents are American, they were not born in America. So the only way you become American citizens is to bring them to America. And so we got an appointment in Florida, registered them as Americans. The woman in the office could not have been nicer. And then she says, listen, you know, at some point go to Social Security and get a Social Security card. So I grew up out on Long Island, so I knew there was a Social Security office in Freeport. And I go there and I say, we want to get Social Security cards. And the woman says, no, you have to do it in Israel. And I said, excuse me? She says, yeah, you can only do it in Israel. Now, I know it's not true because that's what the woman in Florida told me. You can go into any office. But I didn't know what to do. Now, when I first got there was a guard who tells you how to get your number and everything. So I said, I can't believe this. I know she's wrong. So he says, well, you can ask to see your supervisor. So I went back to the window and I said, I'd like to see a supervisor. So she goes in the back and she makes a phone call. I didn't know that. How did I know? Because the phone next to the guard rang and he picked up and he goes, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize that. He was yelling at her. Why'd you tell them to ask for a supervisor? So she prints out for me the directions to the embassy in Jerusalem. That's what she does for me. And I said, I'd like to see a supervisor because you're not telling the truth. I looked it up online while I was waiting here, and that's not. So she says, okay, fine, you go away from the window. I'm only talking to your daughter, whole thing. And she filled out whatever the forms were. And then it turns out that she either did not fill them out correctly or she did not submit them correctly, because then we got a letter that said, you have never submitted your request for a Social Security card. And I remember thinking to myself, this anti-Semitism that I have to experience. I'm an American, crying out loud. I grew up on Long Island. Here I am, one town away. I was in North Merrick. This is Freeport. And I had it mild. People have much worse experiences, obviously, but just the shock, that's only because of Muhammad Malik. Otherwise, nobody would ever start up with us. The fact that people can attack Jews. So Yisro said to himself, I saw how everybody was inspired and moved by Kriyas Yamsuf. And then I saw by Muhammad Malik how it all disappeared. I got to do something. If you don't do something, it's going to be gone. I heard a story with Don Segel where he rented an apartment in Yerushalayim for this summer. And when the people came back, he said, do you appreciate this view? He says, every morning I look at the window at this view and I say a pasuk, because I know otherwise I'm going to take it for granted. So I look out and I go, Ma Rabu Ma'asecha. I say something so I remember it, so it doesn't become ordinary, because you can lose it. I've told this story over already. I heard this from Rabbi Orlofsky. He said it in public, so I figure I can say it. He says when he was teaching in Aish, he used to take a cab to, into Shah Ashba over there, and then he would walk up the steps to Aish. And he says, and one time I'm walking up and I realized I didn't even turn to look at the kaisel. So how could the kaisel become ordinary to me? That I just forget that it's there. Okay, part of that is built in. Obviously, we tend to take things for granted. Yeah. I was a New Yorker. For the most part, New Yorkers don't go to the Statue of Liberty or the Empire State Building or any of these kind of things unless relatives come in from, out of town and say, can we go see the big buildings? I was like, yeah, sure, let's go, But New Yorkers themselves don't do these things. We're not tourists. And so very often people in Yerushalayim don't feel that drive and appreciation for the kaisel that they otherwise would. I've had people come from America, and I said, so what do you want to do here? He goes, I want to go to the kaisel and Dovid. I said, what else? No, that's why I came to Israel. Every day they would go to the kaisel and Dovid. I don't have this where I come from. You understand? You guys can hop on the bus anytime you want and go and see the kaisel and go and daven there. For me, I came to Israel. This is what's on my agenda. Everything else is secondary. This is what's important to me. So, we can tend to take things for granted. So here there was this tremendous inspiration. It disappeared. And he says, that's why Yisro said, if I don't become a Yid, if I don't become part of the Jewish people, I'm going to lose it also. Because inspiration will take you only so far. I'm sure I've told this story in the past, but it's an amazing story. I taught in Eish Torah in Discovery. Rabbi Kimchi was teaching there, and he told this story, which is stayed with me all these years, such a powerful, powerful story. He said that he was in the Yom Kippur War, and we had very old material. People don't understand how existential the threat that war was. It came out later that Golda Meir and her cabinet were carrying cyanide tablets to commit suicide because they thought they were going to get captured by the Arabs, and they'd rather die than be tortured by the Arabs. We were running out. We were down to our last bullets. If Alexander Haig hadn't made an airlift to send us arms, we would have just run out. Everyone knows the story of Kahalani with 4 tanks holding off the entire Syrian tank divisions. It was amazing stories, the Nisav and the flows. Anyway, he says, I was in a tank division, and we had old tanks. And the Syrians had the modern Russian tanks. And they had night vision. We didn't. So we stopped for the night in a field, and suddenly a shell comes over from another field and explodes, and we realize the Syrians can see us, but we can't see them. So the commander says, evasive maneuvers. And everybody start moving your tanks around. And he says, forget it. We're not going to get away. Hunker down and hope for the best. And he says, for an hour, shells were raining down. And they had armor-piercing shells. Any of those shells would hit us, there'd be nothing left. I spoke to somebody who was in the Rabbanut, and he said, and my job in the Yom Kippur War was to collect the dead. And if one of these shells hit the tank, there was nothing to collect. There was only ashes. And these shells are raining down. We're waiting for destruction at any minute. And finally it stops. Finally it stops towards morning. And the commander gets on the radio and says, casualties report in. Total silence. And he says, anyone who's suffered any damage, please report in. The radio crackles, and someone says, the door of our half-track was blown off. Is anyone injured? No. And I don't hear anything. And I think must be like the only surviving tank. And I slowly start to raise the turret and look around the field. And all around the field, every tank is raising their turret to look around. They missed us all around the ground. It was all pot-marked. They didn't hit one tank. We fell out of the tanks laughing. We couldn't believe what an unbelievable nace this was. Not one, they didn't hit one. And all around us. And if we hadn't moved a little bit at the beginning, now we probably all got blown up. He says, well, you can imagine that morning I put on my tefillin to daven with a lot of kavanah. And someone I was in a completely secular unit. And someone taps me on the shoulder and says, no, kimchi, yalla. And I thought, we're pulling out already? And the whole division was lined up to put on my tefillin. I was the only pair of tefillin of the division. And, of course, everyone asked, what happened? Nothing. They were all moved. They put on tefillin. They said, Shema Yisrael. And then they went back to their regular lives. Yisro said, I realized you could have Kriyas Yamsuf and the whole world is moved. And comes Amalek and poof, it all disappears. And that's what's going to happen to me, says Yisro, if I don't do something, if I don't act on this. And so he came to be Megaya. Rus Hamoavis is married to this Jewish guy. Whether she had a conversion or not is, of course, a machlekes. But whatever it was apparently conditional. And she and Orpah married the two sons of Elimelech. And Elimelech dies, the two sons die. And Naomi says, I have nothing for you. There's no children, not going to be any Yibam. There's nothing here. I don't have any money left. I'm a pariah among my own people. Go back. Go back. Rus was a princess. Go back to your family. Go back to Moab. And they both say tearfully, no, we don't want to leave you. And she says, trust me, I have nothing for you. Go back. And after a few times, Orpah says, okay. And he says goodbye, and she leaves. And Naomi says, I ain't leaving. You could say anything you want. You could do whatever I want. By the way, this is the source where when somebody comes to be Megaya, we try to talk them out of it. You know? The church, the Christian church, used to give money to people who would convert. You know? The Muslims would give incentives for people to convert. Usually it was, sword and fire. But I'll give you some kind of incentive to convert. When a person comes to a Jew, says, I want to convert, he goes, why? Why would you want to do that? Are you crazy? It's from here. You see, Naomi says, you don't want to join the Jewish people unless you're really on board. And Orpah turns away, and Rus stays on, and Orpah ends up becoming the mother of Goliath, and who becomes the mortal enemy of the Jewish people. And of course, from Rus comes Dovid Melech, and so their two children face off against each other in the future. Because at some point, you got to make a choice. Am I going to be moved by this or not? Am I going to be distracted? Am I going to be talked out of it? Or am I say, I am here for the long run. I am your people. Where you go, I will go. Where you sleep, I will sleep. Where you eat, I will eat. I'm going to join your people. And she comes back having been a princess. And she's now has the position of walking after the people who are harvesting the grain to pick up the few sheaves that they dropped, which she's then going to thresh and make into kernels of wheat and grind up to make bread for her and her mother-in-law, who are now living in abject poverty when they were powerful leaders. And she gave up everything to be able to come to this. An astounding concept that a person will do this. Because when we come to Har Sinai and we makabel the Torah, we were all Megayah. We were makabel all Malchus Shemayim. And in fact, we learn out the laws of Gerus, of conversion, from Har Sinai. Because all of the men had to have a bris milah. Everybody had to go to the mikvah. And we had to be makabel all of the mitzvos at Har Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma. Those are the 3 steps if you want to become a Jew. You have to, if you're a man, have a circumcision. If you're anybody, you have to go to the mikveh. And then you have to makabel upon yourself all of the mitzvahs, not some of the mitzvahs. We said, Na'aseh v'nishma, whatever you say, we're prepared to do. And so we all had a din of Gerim. And so we read the story of 2 of the most famous Gerim in Jewish history, Yisro and Rus, whose names obviously are also very close to each other. Yisro and Rus, they share a lot of letters. Yeah. Yisro, the gematria, is 616. And Rus is 606. So Rus and Yisro, the same one, just with a yud added into Yisro's name. It's not a coincidence that to be able to come in and accept the entire Torah on ourselves, right? And why was Rus begematria 606? Because she already had the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, the 7 Noahide laws. So you add that in, you come to 613. Yeah. So why Yisro would be 616, I heard once, because according to the view that the 3 mitzvahs of Morah that were given were a separate thing, so he took those 3 on as well. However you want to look at it. But it means that these are the people who set the standard for what it means to become a Jew. When we walk into Shavuos, we can't walk into it with a sense of entitlement. I was born Jewish. I'm a Jew. Rather, every one of us has to look at ourselves standing at Har Sinai saying, I am going to be makabel ol malchus shamayim upon myself. I am going to start that journey that so many people had to start. I would suggest that you go back and listen to my interview with Nissim Black and listen to his journey to become a Jew and what it meant. And the difficulties that he has adjusting to a frum lifestyle. When you come being a black rapper, you know, it's not as easy as one might imagine. And if you listen to the episodes, he tells a story about a friend of him who has dreadlocks, who also decided to convert. And someone said to him, you know, you should really cut off the dreadlocks, you'd fit in better. And he says, my friend said to him, and you think if I cut off the dreadlocks, I'm going to fit in? I thought that was a great line. But he was so deep and so spiritual. It was calling to him. I had a couple who came to me once for some advice. She came from Texas. He came from Alaska. The two biggest states geographically in the United States. And they were both Gerim. And each one told a similar story. They just felt themselves drawn to Yiddishkeit. The girl from Texas said it was around Christmas time, and I see the neighbors across the street didn't put up a tree or any decorations. And I said, Mama, they must be poor. They can't afford a tree. She says, no, they're Jewish. They don't celebrate Christmas. Says, what do? I don't know. So one night I see them in the window light a candle. And I don't know why. I could not look away from that candle. I was just staring at the candle. And the next night it was 2 candles and then 3 candles. And I just knew, that this was calling out to me. I had a girl in my house, Neve Yerushalayim. She came from rural Arkansas. Her father was a pastor. And she suddenly decided that Judaism was the real thing. Her family threw her out, threw her out of the house, disowned her, and she was going to become frum, no matter what the challenges that stood in her way. Becoming a Baal Tshuva is tough. It's tough. It's hard. Becoming a ger? There was a fellow who's a Rav. I didn't even know he was a ger. But we're talking one time, and he says to me, all those goyim are anti-Semitin. Take my mother, she's the worst. And I remember thinking, what does that? And you don't even realize. And the decision to become part of the Jewish people, right? We know the story of Onkelos, the ger, what he had to do in order to become a ger. We know the story of the ger Tzedek of Vilna, where he was, somebody told me they went to Europe and they saw one of his family's palaces, castle. They had a whole bunch of them. He was fabulously wealthy and powerful, and he gave it up to become a Yid and become a plain, poor, ordinary Jew and to take on that role. When you look at people who've decided to do it, now there are people who take it on and are not serious about it. I don't know if she's still around anymore. I haven't really heard of her anymore. There used to be this woman. She wasn't even a psychologist. But she was called Dr. Laura Schlesinger. Her doctorate was in something else completely. It wasn't in psychology. But she would do a call-in show and she'd give psychological advice, etc. And at some point, she decided to be Megayer Orthodox. And she was the poster girl for all the Kiruv organizations. She'd come to the dinners and she'd speak and, and it was talk about her Judaism, how important her Judaism is to her and everything. And at some point, she made an announcement that she's going back to Christianity because the Jewish community is not supporting her and her show. So she's giving up being Jewish. I remember at the time, I was just astounded. That's how much your Judaism means to you. If I don't get the support of people to listen to my radio show, then forget it. I'm out. Astounding concept. Yeah. The hallmark of a Jew is that, well, I've told this over, I'm sure, many times, that Rashach asked the Brisker Rav, he goes, Amunah? Anybody can figure out Amunah. Anybody with a brain can figure out that there's a God and he gave the Torah. Ad kedei kach, says Rav Elchanan Wasserman, that every 13-year-old boy, one of the Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach, is to reject Avodah Zarah and accept God. That means you have to be able to figure out that there's a God. The evidence is there for anybody who's honest and is looking. So he says, Emunah, what's the big deal? And the Brisker Rebbe says, you're right. Emunah starts when it doesn't make sense. When it becomes hard, that's when you see who's serious about it or not. And throughout history, many Jews have dropped out. They converted, they assimilated, they disappeared from history. I heard a statistic once. I didn't check into this. Not Pesach Kron, just say it over. But I heard that at the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, the population of the Jews in Israel was the same as the population of China, which means all things being equal, there should be as many Jews in the world today as there are Chinese. And there's not. Okay, so some of it's from the anti-Semitism and the destruction, but some of it is just Jews vanish because it's too hard. Too hard. When you're confronted with a situation, I have trouble thinking about these things. I'll be perfectly honest. When I read stories about the Holocaust and what people did and what people went through, I say to myself, I probably wouldn't have made it to the train. They would have shot me before I got to the train because I don't have that kind of strength and power to be able to withstand this amount of suffering. How do these people do it? And you go back in history. For most of Jewish history, your life was mamash al hasaf. It was on edge. And suddenly they might decide to exile all the Jews, kick everybody out, find someplace else to stay, and then find your way back. Take away all of your money. Just force everybody to convert. You can do anything you want. What Jewish life was like for thousands of years, so incredibly difficult. And Jews managed. They kept it going. For all of these years, it's what we've gone through, the sacrifices. And today, Baruch Hashem, for the most part, most of us don't have to face those kind of nisyonos. Some of us do. The people who are still captive in Gaza, they still have to face these kind of nisyonos. But most of us, it's inconvenient. In my father's generation, people used to come to America, they would change their name and do the best they could to fit in because it was easier. There were more opportunities. Jew life was hard. Not as hard as in Europe. For the most part, there weren't pogroms. But it's easier to be successful if I'm not Jewish in the world. So the sacrifice that we have is nothing compared to the sacrifice of past generations. And it's nothing compared to the sacrifice of Gerim, of people who decide to give up their family and give up everything they know to be able to come and join the Jewish people. And there are some people who convert just, Elizabeth Taylor wanted to marry Eddie Fisher, a Jewish guy. So she converted. I don't know what conversion she had. She never took on Torah and mitzvahs, obviously. But she went through some kind of conversion. She still felt kind of Jewish. But then you have people like Dr. Laura. They had mamash from conversion and then said, nah, I'm not interested anymore. People go off. That's why the Gemara presents Gerim as something of a mixed bag. If you have people who are joining just because it's an advantage, or I want to marry somebody or something like that. These are not usually a benefit to the Jewish people, the way it's presented. But people who come in because they really want to. That's the story of Onkelos the Ger, as it's described in the Gemara. He brings up from the dead Bilam, Titus, Yoshka Pandrik, and they all tell them in the next world, the Jews have it good. Now, at this time, the Romans had a rule that if you convert to Judaism, you get killed. And he was the nephew of the emperor. So he decides he's going to convert to Judaism, and he writes to the emperor, and he says, I want to convert, I want to go into business. Can you give me some advice? He says, buy low, sell high. Fine. And then he converts to Judaism. And when the emperor finds out, he says to his nephew, how could you do something like that? He said, I took your advice. I couldn't find anything more devalued in the world than Judaism. And it's going to be the most precious thing when Mashiach comes and in the world to come. So I bought low, I'm selling high. Well, like most Roman emperors, he had no sense of humor. So he sent a group of soldiers to come and arrest him, and he does kiruv on them, and they all convert. And then the next group comes, and he does the same thing and with the third group. So he's running out of soldiers. Yeah. So he finally just disinherits him. Yeah. And that's why his name was Uncle Les. But anyway, so he decides to become a Jew. And what did he give up? Like Rus Hamoavis, who was a princess, gave up everything to join the Jewish people. And there have been people throughout history. Rabbi Akiva came from Gerim. Shmai Naftalian came from Gerim. Rabbi Meir came from Gerim. Some of the greatest people in Klal Yisrael came from Gerim. And some of them were descended from some of the worst characters in history. And the enemies of the Jewish people. It says the descendants of Haman are sitting and learning Torah. Sancheriv, descendants are learning Torah. The ability for people to come around. Rabbi Wein tells the story where he sees this fellow who seems to be Hasidish with these two little kids, blonde, blue-eyed, beautiful little blonde. They don't look Jewish. Now, Rabbi Wein's faster on the uptake than I am. I once had this girl at my Shabbos table from Neve, blonde, blue-eyed Texan. And I said, so, nobody's, of course, born in Texas. You all moved there from someplace, I said, where was your family from originally? Because we've been in Texas since the 1840s. I said, no way, there were Jews in Texas in the 1840s? And everyone around the table was going, no. I said, that's so interesting. Were there shuls there with this? And she's like, Anyway, after my wife kicked me enough time under the table, I go, oh, okay, never mind. But Rabbi Wein could see right away that these people look Germanic. It could be also the accent. Yeah, they're not German. So he tells him the story. My father was an SS officer in World War II, and I didn't know. And I grew up in post-war Germany. And at some point, I found out who my father was and what he had done. And I left home, and I converted to Judaism. I moved to Eretz Yisrael, and I turned my back on my family. And then I get a call from my mother, your father's dying. He really wants to see you before he dies. And I thought to myself, my father's a Nazi. I'm going to go take him with my two little Jewish children. Let him see his grandchildren that he tried to kill. And so I go to visit this Nazi father of mine who's dying. And I said, you must have some schus that you were zoiche to have two from Jewish grandchildren. What did you do? And he said, one time I was rounding everybody up and I found these two little children in a house hiding. And I don't know why. something moved inside of me, and I said, run away. And I didn't kill them. I didn't deport them. And I said to my father, too bad. If you had saved a few more, maybe I would have had some more children. Do you understand what it takes for somebody who's a black rapper, and who's his career was just taking off to say, I'm going to give this up and become a Jew? And not everybody appreciates the sacrifices. Listen, I'm an American who moved to Eretz Yisrael. I'm here 36 years. Almost no Israelis appreciate the fact that I gave up everything to come and join the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. Nobody cares. Who needs you people? Go back to America. You know how many times I've been told that over my 36 years? There's no appreciation for the sacrifice. There are many Bali Tshuva. People don't appreciate the sacrifices that they've made to join Judaism. And there are many Gerim. A guy had a shidduch, went to Shlomo Zalman and says, it sounds like she's a good girl, but she's a Geyeris. And Shlomo Zalman said, yeah. He says, I don't know, do I want to marry Geyeris, He says, why? Then every day when you love your wife, you also get the mitzvah of Ohev Hager. Takes the mind of a gadol b'Yisrael to be able to look at it from that point of view. Yeah. So we go into Shavuos and we have to look at ourselves all as Gerim. Right? Everyone knows the famous story where someone went to the Ger Rebbe and he was asking a shayla. He goes, don't get me wrong, I'm not a Baal Tshuva. And he said to him, why not? And he says, we made a mistake. He says, in 1948, the gates of Geula opened and only the Zionists decided to walk in and the Frum Jews didn't. Otherwise, we could have brought Mashiach. Now the gates of Tshuva are opening up and only the Bali Tshuva are taking advantage of it. Why aren't we? Why don't we do Tshuva and take advantage of the fact that the gates of Tshuva are now open? So the fact that we come into Shavuos and we're going to stand there Shavuos morning and read, and we're not going to read those words, they're really mishpatim, but we're going to say, Na'aseh v'nishma, and see ourselves standing at Har Sinai and being mekabel the Torah on ourselves each time, where we all become Gerim. We all start over again, and we're accepting it upon ourselves. We have to look at the people who have made the hardest decisions to be able to come and join the Jewish people, or to rejoin the Jewish people, and have a special level of appreciation for them. Because that's what Shavuos is. That's why we read Megillas Rus, to hear the story about this princess who gave it up to follow her widowed mother-in-law and walk through the fields with all the other beggars to pick up the few sheaves of wheat that were left behind. We read about Yisro, who turned his back on his people and joined the Jewish people. Not everybody appreciates this. The Anani Kavod surrounded the Machane Yisrael. And the Machane Yisrael was set up. In the middle was the Mishkan. Around them went Levi, Shevet Levi. Around them on each side went 3 Shvatim and the Anani Kavod. Where was Yisro? He was outside of the Machane. Where were the Erev Rav, the people who joined in? They were outside of the Machane. They weren't able to be within it. And that's what drove the Mekalel to the point that he curses HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because he wants to set up his tent in Dan. And they say, no, your father was an Egyptian. You go chutz l'machane. He says, but my mother was from Dan. He goes, I know, but it doesn't go by your mother. It goes by your father. You go out there. And he was so upset about this. The Gerim join, and they understand. I'm coming in, and I don't have that advantage of saying Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. I'm new to this. I joined. And yet we had some of the greatest Torah minds ever that came because they came from Gerim. The people who decided, Or as somebody once put it, there are two groups. There are Jews from birth and Jews from choice. Everybody's born a Jew if your mother was Jewish. And then there are people who say, I decided to join the Jewish people. That is a very, very powerful thing. So as we go in on this Shavuos, let's keep in mind the fact that all of us are becoming Gerim. All of us are becoming Bali Tshuva, like the Ger Rebbe said. All of us are joining with, and when we read the story of Yisro, who decided to become a Yid, and we read the story of Rus, who decided to become a Jew, all of us have to have that inside of ourselves, the Shavuos, that we want to become Jews by choice. And that brings us to the question and answer portion of our program. And the question and answers are sponsored by Jeffrey Uslander. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Le'olei Nishmas Chana Gittel Bas Shmuel and Michal Leib Ben Aryeh. And I hope that it'll be an aliyah for the neshama, because there are a lot of people who gain a lot from these question and answers. People tell me that they don't always have a forum to be able to ask their questions. So I do the best I can. I don't get to a lot of them. I sometimes get emails that said, why haven't you answered my question? Because there's only so much we can get to in an episode. And like I say, hopefully we'll start that course, question and answer. We'll go through all of them as much as we can. By Anonymous, hi, Rabbi. I love the show and want to know if you believe in astrology. My friends always talk about zodiac signs, times of the year, which combos make for good marriages, etc. Is it real? My birthday is January 12th. So if you look it up, that would make me a Capricorn. And I had friends who were into astrology, and they used to say to me, it makes sense, you're such a Capricorn. And then at some point I realized that my birthday is Gimel Shvat. The mazel for Shvat is in fact Aquarius. So I said to these friends at some point, I'm not really a Capricorn, I'm an Aquarius. And they said, well, that makes sense. You're such an Aquarius. Okay, fine. So that's sort of astrology where they write in the newspaper, you're going to meet somebody today, something's going to happen to you, etc. That's not real, right? But is there a real sense of astrology and that power being able to affect us? And the answer is yes. And that's why, although we may not realize it when we say Mazel Tov, it's usually translated as good luck. Mazel Tov actually means, may you have a good zodiac sign. The mazolos are the signs of the zodiac. And it pops up a lot. When you say Tfilas Geshem and Tfilas Tal, there's a period over there that goes according to all of the mazolos, the, if you will, zodiac signs of the year. When you say the Kinna Tisha B'Av night, there's a Kinna going through all the mazolos, discussing how each mazel was crying on the Chorban. You can find in the Svarim where it discusses why each mazel is there. The Kli Yakar says that on Nisan, which is in the secular calendar Aries, by us it's called the Tleh, the sheep. It says the power of the sheep is there, and the mazel, because we go by the lunar months, is the most powerful on the 14th and the 15th. And since they worshipped the Tleh, that's why we shecht it on the 14th and eat it on the 15th to cancel out, to show that the power of the month of the Tleh doesn't have that power of Avodah Zarah. But the Ogdal Yo, we spoke about it in past years, discusses the power of the Tleh in Nisan. We came out like sheep, because Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim. So, yeah, the fact that Libra, the scales, Moznayim, is the sign of Tishrei, when we have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Hoshana Rabbah, the days of judgment. All of these things are significant. There's definitely a power to each month that the mazel represents. And if you're born in a particular month, so then definitely that mazel has an effect on you. So does the day of the week when you were born. So does the effect of whichever planet was rising at that time. The Gemara in Shabbos discusses that these things can all influence who you are. It's not that you're stuck with that. It's just you have a natural natiya. So it says if you were born under Mars, which is the red planet because it represents Dam, so you'll have a tendency towards blood. So if you're evil, you'll become a murderer. If you're average, you'll become a doctor or a shochet. If you're tzaddik, you'll become a moil. If you're like me and you were not born under it, then you will stay far away from blood because you cannot handle it. Yeah. If you're born, and discusses if you're born under a water sign or an earth sign or a fire sign, you'll have tendencies in that direction. So none of these are absolute, because at the end of the day, we can rise above all these things. The Chizkuni on Parshas B'Shalach, when it says Moshe told Yehoshua, B'chalacha Anoshim, choose people, the Chizkuni says people who were born in Adar Beis, because Adar Beis doesn't have a mazel, and therefore the Amalek, which has the power of Kishuf, they could use your mazel to affect you. It has no power. So yeah, you find this idea mentioned quite a lot. So do we use this? No, of course. We Aquariuses don't really believe in that stuff. But is there a power that's built into the Bria under the Mazolos? 100%. And that's it for this week. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. We have more material. You can sign up for one of our online shiurim. You could sponsor an episode, please. We're out of sponsors. You could sponsor a question and answer. Thank you so much. You could sponsor a Parsha in 5. And you can help to keep this going. And you could submit a question. You can make a comment. And that's it. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode. And we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah, anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.